Hi, Gavin Allinson here, and we've got Dr Aseem Malhotra and Pat Cash, and we're obviously talking about sugar and the role that sugar plays in athletics and sports events. And Pat, you're an advocate of a low sugar, high fat type of approach.
Yeah, it's sports has changed a lot in the last since I was a pro player. I mean, it was. Initially, when we came on the circuit, I was, the people were eating steaks and eggs and stuff like that, and going on. And then, of course, the high carb loading was very popular. So you literally could not go into any tennis place in the world without having massive bowls of pasta, and that's about it. Any tennis tournament, that was about what they did for the players, and I think things have changed. I think it's obviously it's changing over the years. There still is a giant element of pasta involved in the tennis tournaments. If you go to Wimbledon, which is just around the corner now as we speak, literally around the corner, but you'll have different elements of food there. I still think it needs a massive improvement, but I've found that I didn't recover from carbs. I just never really recovered. I was exhausted the next morning. I think I have a bit of a gluten intolerance as well, but so that didn't help. So over the years that I've realised, now that I'm older, I've got had a lot of injury throughout my career. The body it's been aching. I've got no discs left. My hips worn out. My knees. I've literally lost count. I think 6, 7 surgeries on the knees, broken Achilles, all that. But I want to still be active, and I found that the low carb diet has helped with inflammation. I don't quite understand that. The doctor could explain better about the inflammation.
How did you get started on the high fat, low carb type of approach?
Well, I like to experiment first of all, but initially was. One of the kids that I coached in my tennis academy in Australia, and my son said, who's good mates with him, said, "Do you know that Richard is diabetic?" And I was like, "What?" He's the fittest guy in the world. Yeah, some rare diabetic thing, but he doesn't take any insulin, and he's on this ketogenic diet. I said, "I've heard of that." I said, he said, "I think you should check it out." So I called this kid and I talked to him, and I said, "How's your lifestyle now?" He says, "Nothing's changed." He says, "You still mountain climbing?" "Yeah, I'm still rock climbing. I'm still playing tennis. I'm still doing all the things that I'm doing." You're not a pro tennis player, but he's still active, and he was doing gyrotonics and karate, martial arts, everything. He said, "Okay, what about building muscle? If they can't build muscle, a ketogenic diet or the low carb diet?" He said, "No." He says, "I'm a little bit strange for a couple of weeks, but I'm strong as I ever was. I don't take any insulin." I'm like, "I don't understand that." He said,
he's not having any sugars at all.
He's not having any sugars at all. He says, "I'm on a really strict diet because it means life or death." And so I looked into that, and the main thing for me again was the joint pain, and I kept hearing this about inflammation. And for me, that was, hey, I'm 52 or 51. I'm 53 now, but when I started it a couple of years ago, I thought, I still want to play. I'm still competing, not as hard as I used to, but I want to keep going. Why not, if I can, and keep hitting some tennis balls.
So about that inflammation, Aseem, is that something you come across, or how's that working?
Well, the first thing is, I think what's really interesting about people that go low carb and people that adopt this approach is that they tend to feel better. And the evidence and science is telling us that many athletes actually perform better when they rely on ketones, so they rely on fat as their fuel, not glucose, and obviously they have to cut the glucose and starch out of their diet. But on top of that, when you look at, so for me as a cardiologist, when you look at actually all the science and evidence about the root cause of heart disease, there are two things that are related, and they interact. And I wrote a paper with two very eminent cardiologists last year in the British Journal of Sports Medicine that became the most read paper of that year of any BMJ journal. It's almost got 1 million views now, and we basically wanted to change the mindset and the understanding about what causes heart disease. And there are two things: insulin resistance, so your body becoming resistant to the hormone insulin over time, which actually is related to having very high processed refined carbohydrate diet. So when you go keto or you go very low carb, your insulin resistance improves. Generally, your insulin drops, your glucose drops. And the other thing is inflammation, chronic inflammation. And when you look at that and you try and put it all together, certainly there is very good data suggesting that when people go ketogenic, it actually improves markers of inflammation in the blood. So it does fit with Pat's experience. And then, how do we make sense of all of this? I think the first thing is, around the world, globally, the biggest problems we're facing now, public health challenges, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, still one of the biggest killers in the Western world. And the number one risk factor of that, again, is insulin resistance, which has been neglected. Now, how do you combat that? The best way is not by taking, there's no drug that actually helps with this, it's actually from lifestyle changes and getting a low carb diet and keeping active, reducing stress, getting a good sleep. If you do all of that, you are, on the road to better health and reducing the risk of many conditions, whether it's heart disease, type 2, even cancer now is very much linked to it, and it's independent of body weight. So, Pat is always been very fit and never, I'm sure, has never been overweight. And one of the things I say is, there's no such thing as a healthy weight, just a healthy person. So this is actually beyond just people's weight as well. It's actually about their overall metabolic health. So it all makes sense, and definitely the way forward.
Yeah, because that's interesting, because if you're going to be going low sugar, you've got to be replacing that with something else. And this is where the role of fat and saturated fat comes in. And because lots of people in the industry as it is, or the marketplace, people still got the view that saturated fat is bad.
Yeah.
So I always heard that, it's fat, and I keep getting this all the time when I talk about a high-fat diet, you're going to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
It's going to be cholesterol, you're going to have a heart attack, So,
You've got the cardiologist.
Please explain this.
Yeah, no, sure. So the original thinking behind it, and this is actually where we went wrong, was Flawed Science in the 70s and 80s that changed dietary guidelines around the world. Was the thinking was saturated fat in foods like butter and cheese and eggs and steak raises cholesterol, raised cholesterol is linked to heart disease, and that's what happens. But actually, when you look at all the data now, first thing to say, very clearly, saturated fat from diet does not clog the arteries. Absolutely not. No link whatsoever, okay? So you can forget about it. The reason for that is, when you explain it biologically, cholesterol is made up of a number of different parts or molecules. So you've got the good cholesterol, HDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, LDL, which isn't as bad as people think, people thought it was now. I mean, I did a paper where we looked at people over the age of 60, and the higher your LDL, so-called bad cholesterol, no link with heart disease, and less likely to die, partly because it's involved in the immune system. But even if you forget about that, by eating more saturated fat, the impacts on your LDL cholesterol is very, very small. But what it does do, things like coconut oil and butter, it raises your good cholesterol quite significantly. So the overall effect on the cholesterol profile, which is one of the risk factors for heart disease, we call it the total cholesterol divided by the HDL ratio, is neutral. And that's something that, earlier on they didn't realize and didn't get. So that when you look at all of the data on the best studies and lots of different, in healthy people and people with heart disease, no impacts on reducing saturated fat on heart attacks, and it certainly can be very much part of a healthy diet. Now that doesn't mean that you should just, your whole diet should just be, lots of steak and butter and whatever else. I say to my patients, my heart attack patients, you can enjoy this, but what you should be doing is getting the base right, which is things like olive oil, nuts, lots of veggies, and cut out the starch and sugar. And if you do that, then you don't have to worry about steak and cheese and eggs. You can enjoy it to your heart's content.
That's good, because what I do is at least twice a year, 3 times a year, is I get everything, my whole blood panel of everything. And when I went onto the diet, I said, can you just check cholesterol, because I want to make sure that it's not getting too high. And every time it comes back, he goes, yeah, everything's fine. I said, no problems at all. And he said, why? And I was with a doctor in Australia, and he goes, why? I said, well, I've just gone towards a high carb, low carb, high fat, keto-ish diet. And he goes, straight away, he goes, that's the diet. He said, that's the diet. So, but you don't hear it very often in a lot of the doctors. So it's starting to come around. Yeah,
well, this is where we're at the vanguard of all this type of push towards the movement away from high sugar or higher carbs.
Well, I think some of these things take time, and one of the things people don't realise is science evolves, and medical science is not an exact science. I tell my medical students it's a practice of the art of probabilities, but the information that we've been given for so long was selected, ignored other stuff to the contrary, and then a whole industry, Pat, as you know, has developed around high sugar foods, foods to lower cholesterol, and it's the reality. This is the way the world works. It does take time for people to realize that's wrong, and the industry then needs to change. But it's happening, and next week, there's a village where I grew up in Great Manchester called Tameside. There has become the first hospital to get rid of sugary foods and drinks from their canteen, and they're encouraging everyone for 70 days, Pat, to go basically sugar-free and essentially low carb, to follow a diet plan that I put together, which is amazing. I mean, that's great progress, and it's got support from the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, formerly Secretary for Health. Lots of doctors are supporting it. So I think this could be a tipping point.
So it's a real logistic effort to get this done. But they're actually the hospital. I've always heard that you go to the hospital to get sick because the food they give you is so bad. The hospital food is famous for being really bad.
Mate, it's crazy. I mean, the stuff you get on the high street, we've allowed that to get into our hospitals. I remember operating on a guy years ago in the middle of the night, had a heart attack. Next morning, he was a smoker as well. Wasn't particularly overweight, but a bit of a belly. I mean, the belly fat is the key problem. And on the ward round the next day, I'm speaking to him about you need to follow a healthy diet, stop smoking. And just as I'm telling him that, Pat, he gets served a burger and fries
from the hospital.
From the hospital, and he says to me, he says, "Doc, how do you expect me to change my lifestyle when you're serving me the same crap that led to me coming here in the first place?" And it got me thinking, and that's how we thought, okay, listen, we need to set an example. But this sort of junk food, Pat, has just infiltrated everywhere, and I'm sure even if you go to Wimbledon or everywhere, all that,
there's candy bars everywhere. Yeah, there is.
Exactly.
Well,
so what you've got a book and a diet. What is the diet?
So it's based upon one of the world's healthiest villages. There's a place in southern Italy called Pioppi, where the average life expectancy is over 90. A lot of people live at the age of 100. Their average life expectancy is 10 years more than the average Tour de France cyclist. Yet they have no gyms, no prescribed exercises, just outside. They're moving constantly. And we looked at what are the components of their lifestyle, their diet, and how they live that marries with the overall research about how to live a healthy life. And it was things like olive oil and lots of veggies and oily fish. And their pasta and bread consumption, because people think Italian diet, pasta and bread,
that's right.
was actually traditionally much smaller than what. So it's traditional Italian diet. Small amount of pasta, never a main course, with some olive oil. Yeah. Sugar was eaten once a week as a dessert on a Sunday, so very rare they had sugar. And pizza once a fortnight. When you look at that and you look at all the other positive components of their health, it was a great way to live. So that's why. So we based it upon that, and we said, listen, we're going to take out the modern bread's not like the old bread. It's very high glycemic index. It's not what our grandparents would eat when they were baking bread and spending days. Fermenting it. So when we took all the best components with the science of that diet plan, and we basically said, listen, in 21 days, I mean, that's the other thing, the effects on health and blood markers and cholesterol and that kind of thing are rapid. So my patients, a lot of them are coming off their medications for type 2 diabetes, their blood pressure gets better because insulin resistance raises blood pressure. The heart disease risk factors within 21 days. So that was the
21 days to make
21
change
days, absolutely, mate. And and we encourage exercise. We say mindful movement. So things like Pilates, yoga. My co-author is a former international athlete. And we basically say, listen, just get moving. Don't sit for more than 45 minutes. Just get outside. Do what you enjoy, but it's very simple. You don't necessarily need to join a gym and spend loads of money. Right. Just get outside, change your diet plan, and you will notice a difference. Come sugar-free, basically. Go sugar-free. Yeah. And within 21 days, you'll feel better. Your quality of life will improve. And actually, as someone who's a practicing cardiologist, conventional medicine doctor, I've realized, Pat, now, these lifestyle changes are more powerful than any drug for both preventing and treating heart disease. And they come without side effects. So the future now is let's get the lifestyle to the forefront, and let's get people off off the pills that are causing side effects and not really helping anyone. That's why our healthcare system's under strain. So that's the future.
Yeah, this is partly how I came into all this. I've been doing a prolonged 3-day fast for about the last 18 months, and just having water. And how I felt so much better having done that, particularly just on after 36 hours. I've burnt through all my glycogen stores, and then my body's breaking down fat. And it's almost like a rebooting of your system. When your computer stops working properly, you do Control-Alt-Delete, and then all of a sudden it's working well again. And what I was feeling so good on the Tuesday morning after 36 hours. I've decided to do it like every week. So not really? just not eat on a Monday. Just not eat on a Monday, as an intervention as well. And what I'm finding is we've got a Facebook group, and lots of people are being drawn into that as a way just to start down this route of the healthy diet. They're looking at what they're eating, they're feeling better just within 24, 36 hours, and making some changes. So that's what it's all about, is finding ways to help people make these changes. And your 21-day plan is awesome.
I've heard. I know Kelly Slater is the surfer, who's the world champion surfer. I know he goes on these long fasts, like a week on various things and still surfs. I don't know if he has the energy to do that, but obviously you got still enough fat in the system to keep you going.
And you have a more balanced energy. You're focused. You don't feel hungry. That's another thing for people to have is when your body's breaking down fat, it's producing ketones, and those ketones have an appetite suppressing effect as well. So not only is the inflammation, but it's that appetite suppression.
And even the slimmest athletes, they have their fat stores that can keep them going for a very long time. thousands and thousands of calories. Even the slimmest athletes can. So they find that's actually a better fuel for a lot of people. It works for them.
Yeah, I'm not much on that. I've got a bit of a sweet tooth. I don't like starving myself, but I do take the ketone supplements, which are a great find for me. I've been out. I'm not sure if they're out here, not in the UK really here, but the last 18 months or a year, I got very excited about the ketone supplements.
And how have you been using them?
I use them pretty much mid-morning and mid-afternoon, which tends to be when I'm starting to get hungry, as you said, a bit of an appetite suppressant, and it's usually the time when I'm doing a workout. I don't work out twice a day anymore, I do it once a day, and it's usually on a couple of hours after a meal, so it gives energy. It's a suppressant, and I found that my muscles are much softer. That's what I found. So I take a couple of times a day. My muscles recover a lot more, a lot quicker, and they're softer. Literally, I mean, I work out and I feel like, oh, my muscles are actually soft. I think I haven't done anything.
More toned, or
they're
because most people want to have hard muscles, though, wouldn't they? Or
yes, but that was one of my problems. But I think with certain diets and overworking is that you get lactic acid, and the muscles get tight.
Yeah.
And you get a masseur getting into me, and you go, "What's going on?" And now it's just like, wow. And a nice flexible, soft muscle is going to work better than something that's rigid.
Of course.
And I think that's, I mean, I've got some injuries, but if you see a bodybuilder come out of the gym, he walks like this.
Yeah.
And you see a ballet dancer who's got long, skinny muscles, and
that's what you want.
Boing, and they'll jump up and spin around 3 times. Get a bodybuilder to try and jump up the ground.
Well, that's the important thing, especially as we start to age as well. And that was part of the reason for the prolonged fasting for me was there's like Volta Longo's work, in terms of extending your life by the autophagy process that goes on. Your body breaks down those poor performing and disease cells and recycles them. So that was why I got drawn into it, and then all these other benefits have come from that.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Cool.
I think it's starting. Certainly, ketones are starting. I've seen them go into different sports, but tennis is a little bit slower.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the research has been done more on the endurance type of sports, and I live in Oxford, and the Oxford University is one of the big centres for research in that. And one of the other things that they're actually doing, I'm going to be a participant in one of the trials next week, is they're looking at the blood glucose lowering effects of them. So they're going to put me onto like an insulin clamp and give me ketones and see what happens. So. Yeah, it's good to be part of all of that.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's an evolving science, and I think what we've been doing. Our healthcare systems are failing. People have got we've clearly been doing something very, very wrong, and I'm sure the solution, part of that solution, is really getting this more into the mainstream now, and letting people give it a go and see how they feel. In fact, people get better. Their weight gets better. They feel better.
Exactly.
And there's obviously going to be a few variations. Some people may not tolerate fasting. Other people. May work for them, but the most important thing really is to cut out the processed food, because if you look at the ultra processed foods, most of it now is made up of starch, sugary drinks, ultra processed fruit and vegetables. It's not fat. Fat is a very small proportion. It's all the starch and sugar. So really, that's what we need to be curbing our consumption of.
Brilliant. Great. Well, really enjoyed this chat, and
thanks.
Hopefully, it makes a difference, and it makes some people change and look at this area a bit more.
Thanks for your time.
Cheers.